It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. We were talking a little while ago. It was 10 years ago that she was here last, so it's been a while. I met Nicole at a conference that I had attended once, and then she came and spoke on campus afterwards. Let me tell you just a little bit about her. She's the founder and director of One Voice. She's the author of 3 books, an international activist on the issues of child sexual abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking. In 2010, she was the first person in history to hold a public forum on sexual abuse and trafficking in East Africa. She spoke along the First Lady of Uganda and the Kenyan Supreme Court Justice. In 2012, she went undercover into the brothels of Cambodia with the film crew to expose the child sex trafficking. And in 2014, founded a nonprofit called One Voice for Freedom that stops child sex slavery around the world. She's been carrying her message out for about 15 years. As we were talking, she was just at Westmont last month. She's headed to Asbury next week. She's brought a friend with her, Mary O'Brien. She'll tell you a little bit more about her. All I learned, she's a radio disc jockey, DJ, in Columbus, Ohio, where they both come from, so they're from good stock. And since I saw Nicole last, she's had 3 sons. So please will you join me in welcoming her to Patrick Henry.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm not sure where you all are from, whether you come from a big city or a small town. If you're anything like me, you come from a really, really small town. The place I'm from in Ohio, we had 1 street light, we had 1 store, and we had more cows than we had people. I don't know, whether you come from a big family, a small family, a single parent home, maybe you never knew your parents at all. I don't know your dreams, your fears, or your nightmares, but I do know that as I come to share with you today, and my friend Mary shares with you today as well, that we aren't so different after all. I want to have you start this morning's chapel just imagining with me a 12-year-old girl. Every day after school, she would run up her gravel driveway to her house, throw her lunchbox on the table, and go to the freezer to get a big bowl of ice cream. She'd take that bowl of ice cream to her hot pink beanbag on the red carpet in her bedroom, and her walls were painted pink. They were covered in posters of ballerinas, basketball players, and the new kids on the block. This girl, she grew up. She was really involved in school. She was really involved in athletics. She was popular. She was student council president. So as she grew up, she was kind of like this poster child of her very small country community. And at home, things seemed just as perfect for her. She lived with her mom and her stepdad. They were all super close. She also had a stepsister who was exactly 5 months and 5 days younger than her. They were best friends. They spent every summer together, every weekend together. So it was seemingly a loving family, a caring, supportive family that she grew up in. A perfect girl, a perfect family, a perfect life. So I want you to imagine with me that same little girl wishing she were someone else, right? Imagine her planning how to run away. Imagine her planning her own funeral. This girl, perfect life, perfect family, not afraid of strangers, not afraid of spiders, but she was afraid to come home each and every day after school. She often had horrible nightmares. She often woke up crying. Okay, why the nightmares, right? Why the crying? Well, she cried because she was miserable, and she was miserable because she had a secret. So I was miserable. I was the girl who came to school every single day with the biggest smile on her face, but I was the same girl who was afraid inside. I had a secret, but I wasn't sure why I had to keep it. I do know that I will never forget the summer of 1994. I was 14 years old, looking forward to my freshman year of high school. And so I already told you that I lived out in the country, right? And we had lots of cows. Well, in our town or whatever, everyone had lots of land because everyone had cows and they had to feed them, right? Well, my family didn't have cows, so we had lots of land and we had to mow our grass, okay? So you're going to think I'm a huge hillbilly right now, which is fine because I watched every single one of you walked in. So just kidding. So as I grew up, like, I think I was like 8 or 9 years old or something, and my stepdad bought this huge tractor, right, that had like a separate mower blade that was attached to the back. And it was my job at like 8, 9, 10 years old to go out and do the mowing of these fields. This was my job on the weekends. Every single weekend I had to do this. So I learned how to drive this huge mama tractor at like 9 years old, okay? And I have a 9-year-old son, and I'm just thinking, I can't even imagine putting him behind a wheel. But that's just life in the country, okay? Just get used to it. That's what we did. So I was out there. I remember it was nice outside, so I decided to get a tan while I mowed. So I put on my bathing suit. I was out there maybe 15 minutes or so when I saw my stepdad coming toward me with a glass of lemonade. So I stopped my tractor, and I waited for him to reach me. Now, the next thing that I'm going to tell you might seem weird, which I hope it does, but for me, I will never forget it. I remember I drank the entire glass of lemonade. I thanked him. And then my stepdad made this comment that was totally off the wall and disgusting. And just the way that he was looking at me, I felt objectified. And a woman knows when they're being objectified. And that's exactly how I felt, just as a 9, 10-year-old little girl by my stepdad. And so I gave him the glass back right away. And I took off, and I continued driving and mowing. And a few minutes later, I looked up, and I saw my stepdad standing on our front deck staring at me with binoculars. And I started crying, and I tried to drive where there were trees so he couldn't see me, but he didn't put them down. He followed me with them wherever I was driving. I remember I wanted to end my life right then and there. I didn't want to deal with this harassment anymore. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And so I put the tractor into the highest gear, and I decided I was going to drive head-on into this huge tree that was at the end of one of these fields, and I had a big drop-off right after it, and I was certain that this is how I was going to end my life. I wanted to end my life, but I wanted to end his torment. So getting closer and closer to that big tree, just fantasizing about never seeing my stepdad again, ending my life, ending everything that he had been doing to me. And then the last second, I thought of my mom, how much this would hurt her, and so I swerved. Obviously, my life didn't end that day, but neither did this torment and this harassment I had been going through. It was supposed to be one of the happiest summers of my life. We were going on this dream vacation to the Bahamas, and I remember getting on the airplane to go down and just, thinking about all the great memories we were going to make as a family, only to come back with some of the worst ones of my life. I remember just being in the ocean and swimming, and my stepdad was there with me. As I came back to the beach where my mom was laying, she kept asking me what was wrong, but as always, I said I would tell her later. And then just coming back home, I remember being in the car and having all these things having happened on that summer vacation with my family and just wrestling with all of it. My mom and I were in the car, and she brought up some current events, and I remember all of a sudden it was silent. We were going to pick up my stepsister to bring her home with us for the weekend, and the traffic light turned red, the car stopped, and as we sat there in silence almost, my mom suddenly just turned to me and she said, I've been really wanting to go back to college, and I talked with your stepdad about this, and he got really angry with me, and he started acting violently and talking to me in ways he never really has before. She said he's been so strange lately, and she turned to me in the car and she said, has he done anything strange around you? Well, I was unsure as to whether or not it was really wrong. I may have even thought it was my fault. But I knew that if I were ever going to tell my mom about the things that my stepfather had been saying, the things he had been doing, the things he had been touching me, the things he had been showing me on the TV, I knew that this was the time. This was the time that I had in my whole life to tell her the truth of what I had been holding inside for so, so long. And so I remember that, my mom hit the accelerator, the light turned green, we were late, it was hot outside, I started sweating, my stomach was all tied up in knots, and then all of a sudden I just told her. She slammed on the brakes and she pulled the car over to the side of the road, and that was the first time in my life I knew that it was wrong. Then she asked me if he had ever touched me. All these memories just started flooding back in my mind, memories I just pushed out for so long. I remember just being the week prior to that, being held in the water in the swimming pool and being touched under my bathing suit. I remember his words to me, do you want to go up to the hotel room? I said, no, I want to swim. He said, we don't have to tell anyone, just come on. I said, no, I want to go lay in the sand with my mom. He said, we'll keep it our little secret. Well, I pulled away from him that time, but he punished me by not speaking to me for the rest of the day. And then that same vacation, the same night, he told me he needed to get some things out of our van and he needed my help. Well, I had no idea what was in store for me, you know. This didn't happen all the time, and sometimes he seemed like a really good dad, and everyone in our community loved him. So sometimes I really wanted to trust what he said, and so I went with him, and I went to help him get some things out of our van, and he told me to hop in the back seat and look for the cooler. He hopped in the back seat too, shut the door, said sit up straight and don't move around. And it happened again with the touching, and I was always so scared, but he said that if I loved him, I would let him. I remember just going back to that conversation with my mom in the car that day, and you know, the question, did he ever touch me? I may not have known the answer when she first started asking these questions in the car, questions I never thought would ever be asked of me. But as I saw her reaction to these memories I was telling her, it was so obvious. All of a sudden, it was obvious that I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And I never, ever in my life thought that I could be labeled as something like this. You know, I came from this wealthy, popular Christian family in a nice community. You know, everyone loved my stepdad, and so did I. I never thought that I could have been labeled as that. I thought that, you know, the things that he said was true, that this was normal, that all girls go through this, that no one talks about it. I think so often we picture things like sexual abuse and sexual violence happening in, you know, to poor city girls living in immoral families with bad parents and no friends. And it does, it happens there, but it also happens in every other type of home, every other type of family, community, church, school. 1 in every 3 girls and 1 in every 6 boys are sexually abused by the time they turn 18. Well, did he ever touch me? My mom got super quiet. She was holding back the tears, and we were already pulling in the driveway to pick up my stepsister. And she was outside waiting for us. So my mom quickly said she didn't know what we were going to do, but not to worry. She was going to figure it out. So we left. My mom and I left our home the following Monday morning as soon as my soon as my stepsister went back to her mom's house. I remember just crying and praying with my mom and just believing together that however things turned out, it would be the best for everyone involved. My mom reported the abuse to the authorities, to Children's Services, and to the police. They interviewed me, they interviewed him, they let us know that he had denied everything, and we were to go to court the very first day of my freshman year of high school. I remember the days that followed were the most frightening days of my life. I was certain that if he found us, he was going to take both of our lives. He was like searching for us everywhere we went. We were hiding at friends' houses and family members' houses, just waiting for our court date. And probably the most frightening day of my life, honestly, occurred on the Thursday of that week. I remember just being tired of being cooped up in all these attics and basements of our friends and family. And it was nice outside. We were staying at my grandmother's house, and I just said to my mom, could we just go for a quick walk around the block? Like, let's just get outside. And so she said, yeah, let's do that. And my grandmother came with us, which was interesting because as we were walking down the street or the sidewalk, I looked up and I saw my stepdad's big blue van driving towards us on the street. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's him. Like, run. We've got to run. And so we start running. And I will tell you, that's when I knew God was real, because my grandma's running style is not like what you want for like a getaway, right? So somehow she was able to keep up with us. Thank you, Jesus. I don't know. I think he did something divine, because we made it for the library, which is just around the corner, and he didn't see us. And then the following Tuesday, we went to stay with some friends, and their kids and the dad of the family took us to the store, and my mom stayed back. But when we drove back to the house, I saw a police car leaving the driveway. And I'll tell you, I knew something was wrong as soon as I walked in the door. My mom was sitting at the dining room table. She was by herself, and she was just, she didn't even look at me when I walked in. It was very quiet. And I said, what's wrong, Mom? Why were the police here? She said, he shot himself. I said, he's dead. She said, yeah. And I remember just running around that house screaming, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. I was so furious, so upset, so hurt that after 10 years of being molested in my own home and not having a voice, I finally found my voice. I broke my silence. I was living in fear for a week, and 7 days later, my stepdad took his own life. I felt like I was robbed of justice here on earth, and I wanted that so bad at that time in my life at 14 years old. And although I would never experience sexual abuse by my stepdad again, I felt like I was left alone. I felt dirty. I felt damaged. I felt like everything was my fault. I felt guilt for his death. I was afraid of what people would think about me if they knew, what I'd gone through. And so it was then, exactly 7 days after I told my story for the first time, I vowed I was never going to tell again. 14 years old, I'm never going to tell anyone again. So, I packed it away, and it wasn't that easy, but, I remember just clinging to my mom and I just clinging to Romans 8:28, that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, and just clinging to that and just going back to school. And, my mom became a college freshman when I became a high school freshman. It seemed better, but there was still the flashbacks and the nightmares. And to this day, I still can't remember when or how it all really started. But I do remember when I was in 5th grade, there was a lady from the sheriff's department that came to our school and showed us a video about childhood sexual abuse. And I remember watching this. It was like a cartoon, okay, on a screen, and sitting on the little library floor with all my 5th grade friends. And my boyfriend, Chucky, right? Chucky, he was like way shorter than me. It was like the weirdest looking couple ever in 5th grade. I don't know why we didn't make it. I don't know. But, Chucky. But I remember watching this, on the screen, thinking to myself, wow, that really seems a lot like what's happening to me. But again, I couldn't bring myself to think that something that, as horrible as I made that sound, could be happening in a family like mine, And so I packed it away, and I didn't tell anybody. I was afraid. So many times people place part of the blame on a survivor or a victim for allowing abuse to happen, or, to not speak up the first time, or maybe to allow an unhealthy dating relationship to continue over a long stretch of time and just not finding your voice. But I've realized that an abuser seeks control, and they know exactly how to silence their victims. My stepdad said he wanted us to be really close. I told you he wanted it to be our little secret. He said that, this goes on and no one really talks about it. He said I would never see my mom again if I told. I would have to live with another family, that, no one would ever believe me because I was just a little girl and he was a popular man in our town. So I felt so tormented as a kid, right? Wanting to tell, not knowing who to tell, not knowing if they would believe me. What would happen if they did believe me? I was afraid, I was confused, I was silenced. My pain put me into hiding. It seemed like there was no way out for me. But the reason I can stand up today and tell you this story, and how I can travel and share the story or write about it, is because I know that it's a lie that I was holding on to, that there was no way out for me. I know now that there is a way out. After an entire childhood of just manipulation, control, and sexual abuse, I can honestly stand here now and tell you that healing is possible by the grace of God. And I think the first step is to share your secret. I'm a work in progress. I think healing from something like sexual trauma is a lifelong journey with Jesus. He always has more healing for me, always. But telling my secret and continuing to speak out and replace lies with truth is so important to my healing journey. And I also think that as this generation finds their voice and breaks the silence on things like sexual violence in our culture, we honor the victims that are surely among us. We give people space to struggle and to heal and to find their voice. When I grew up, I kept asking the question, where were you, God? And why do bad things happen to good people? And I'll tell you, as I grew up, I had a lot of angry fights with God. And I think that helped me grow. I think that grew my relationship with him. Instead of running away with him with all my questions and my anger, I finally went to him because he's the perfect father, right? And he wants to hear our questions. He wants to hear our anger. He wants to wrestle it out with us and comfort us in the midst of it. And over time, I began to believe that he was the only one that could heal my broken places, and that he was the only one who could call me out of my hiding place. So 1 year after I vowed I was never going to tell again, 1 year after my stepdad's suicide, 1 year after I told for the first time, I was invited to this church camp. And I don't know how church camps go now, but back when I went to church camp, they had this time of like open mic at the last day of camp where people could come up and talk about their favorite verse or something cool God did that week. There was a girl who came up and talked about the boyfriend she found at camp. Oh my goodness. Like, come on. I didn't find a boyfriend at camp. I was still grieving Chucky. But for some reason, I got up and I shared my story for the first time. And I'll tell you, I hadn't even told my best friend the truth of why my stepdad had taken his own life yet. It had been a full year, and I've kept my vow of not talking about my abuse. But I told in front of about 300 kids at that church camp that day. And it was like crickets, and I was so embarrassed. But the reason I tell you this is because back when I went to camp, we had this thing called pen pals. Now, I know y'all have never heard of pen pals because we wrote with pen and paper. But, like, it took 3 days to get someone a message. I know, it's so weird, like Amish. Sorry. So I went home, and about 3 days went by, and I started getting these letters in my mailbox. Oh, that's the other thing. You, like, write on paper, you stick it in this thing, you lick it, you stick it. There's a square-shaped sticker you put in the corner. It, like, transports it from one location to another, from a box to another box. Hieroglyphics to you guys, I think. Something like that. So 3 days later, I started getting letters from other kids at this camp telling me their stories for the first time. Many of them were like, Nicole, thank you so much for your courage to share. I thought I was the only one. And here, these kids had stories like mine, families like mine, and they had been going through the same thing. They just needed someone else to speak up in order for them to share their story. How cool is that? So that same week, I opened my Bible, and I came across this verse that completely changed my life. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. It says, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. He's the Father of compassion. He's the God of comfort. He comforts us in all of our troubles so we can comfort others in any trouble with the same comfort we ourselves have received from God. I knew God was comforting me, you know, even when I was upset and crying my pillow. I mean, I felt his comfort. His scripture was comforting to me. Worship was comforting to me. I knew he was meeting me in my hiding place. And then I knew he was calling me out to be a voice for him. Just as that scripture said, I was writing back and forth with all these other survivors of sexual abuse, comforting in them with the same comfort I had received from God. Pain puts us into hiding, you know, but purpose, it calls us out. And so what I came to realize on my personal healing journey was that God was with me through it all. He cried when I cried. He was angry when I was angry. Sometimes I just picture Jesus holding me and weeping over what had been done to me. I'll tell you that breaking the silence, sharing my story was probably the most courageous thing I've ever done in my life. But choosing to allow God to meet me in my hiding place and give me purpose because of my pain was the other. I remember at 15 just coming out of that summer camp experience and deciding in my heart that I was going to be a voice for the voiceless. But at the same time, I felt so overwhelmed because the world seemed like so heavy. You know, I felt like probably some of you feel right now, you know, like a mosquito in a nudist colony. You know, there's so much work to do, you don't know where to start, right? Come on, you guys, that's real funny. It's really funny. Not funny. That was somebody just threw up, actually, I think. Sorry. But for those of you who may walk in my shoes, I just ask you to help us break the silence on sexual abuse. You know, don't shy away from it and realize that if 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the time they ever get to college, you know, many of you have a friend here who has gone through something similar and they need your voice. They need your open ear. I also think it's important to remember that if we don't give people space to struggle, space to tell their secrets and share their stories, that we're only going to perpetuate this abuse for the next generation and the next generation. We have to help one another find their voices, or things are never going to change. One of my favorite Bible verses about Jesus was after his first preaching tour in Galilee. He returns to his home base in Capernaum, and the news spreads that he's there, right? And so he's in this house, and everyone's rushing to this house. It becomes so full of people that they can't even open the door anymore. In Mark 2, it says that Jesus was preaching God's word to the people that were gathered there, and 4 men came carrying one of their friends who was paralyzed on a mat. They couldn't bring their friend to Jesus through the door because of the crowd. So what did they do? They crawled up on the roof and they busted a hole through the roof and lowered their friend, their wounded, hurting friend in need of healing, lowered him right into Jesus' feet. And I love that so much. It was like their love for their suffering friend, this friend who had this ailment, this pain, their love for him made them assertive and persistent and creative because they knew where the healer was. They knew that they as a friend couldn't heal their own friend, right? So they had to bring him to the healer, and they did just that. And I think that's how we can all be an answer to this problem of sexual violence and the pain that our friends are carrying. We can help bring hurting people to Jesus for healing and for a second chance. And I think the truth is we are all second chances, right? We're all walking second chances. I want you to meet my best friend, Mary. She's here with me. She's also a survivor of abuse, and she is going to share a little bit and then close for us today.